café was crowded that morning, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and spilling over the wooden tables. People chatted quietly, clinking cups and spoons, enjoying their coffee and pastries. The smell of fresh espresso hung in the air, blending with the sweet aroma of baked goods. At the far corner of the room, near the old piano that had seen better days, a young man sat quietly. His fingers hovered over the keys, moving slowly at first, testing the notes, almost like he was speaking to the instrument in a language only they both understood. He didn't seem to notice the people around him. Customers came and went, dropping coins into the tip jar or asking the barista for another cup of coffee. Some glanced at him curiously, but most ignored him, assuming he was just another amateur trying to play. His hair was slightly messy, and he wore a simple shirt and jeans. There was nothing flashy or unusual about his appearance that would suggest he was anything more than a casual pianist. The cafe manager, a tall man with a confident stride, noticed him immediately. He was used to seeing performers come and go, and he liked to think he could spot talent at a glance. He walked over, hands on his hips, watching the young man play a few soft, hesitant notes. He smirked to himself, thinking this would be easy to challenge. Leaning slightly over the piano, he said with a teasing tone, "If you play hard piano, I'll kneel right here." The words carried a mix of amusement and disbelief. He didn't expect much, imagining the young man would struggle or falter. A few nearby customers heard the manager and laughed quietly. Some whispered to each other, thinking it would be entertaining to watch the pianist fail. Others looked on with mild curiosity. The atmosphere was light-hearted, playful. The manager chuckled again, confident that this little joke would remain just that, a joke. The young man looked up briefly, his eyes meeting the manager's. There was a calmness there, a quiet confidence that surprised the manager, though he didn't admit it. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the challenge. There was no big reaction, no angry words, no arrogance, just a simple, calm acceptance. The kind of acceptance that made it clear he was taking the moment seriously, even if it seemed casual on the surface. He placed his fingers on the keys again and started playing a gentle melody. It was soft and simple, but there was a clarity and precision in every note. The manager's smirk faltered slightly as he listened. The melody wasn't complicated, but it had a sense of intention, a feeling that the pianist knew exactly what he was doing. Customers who were chatting started to quiet down, some tilting their heads, trying to follow the music. There was something magnetic about the way the notes floated through the room. The young man's hands moved fluidly, almost as if they had a mind of their own. The melody grew slowly, gaining a little strength, a little depth. The manager leaned closer, curious now, though he would never admit it. He had expected hesitation, mistakes, or awkward pauses. Instead, there was a steady confidence in the playing, a rhythm that felt natural and effortless. The notes weren't loud or showy, but they carried a weight, a presence that made people pay attention. Customers began to stop what they were doing. Some put down their phones, some paused mid-sip of their coffee, and others simply turned toward the piano. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, though no one could explain exactly why. It wasn't just music. It was something more. Something in the way the young man played made everyone feel like they were witnessing the beginning of something special. The manager shifted uneasily. He had seen plenty of performers, but there was something different about this young man. He wasn't trying to impress anyone with flashy techniques or loud, dramatic notes. It was as if the music came from deep within him, flowing naturally through his fingers and into the room. The manager laughed nervously, trying to keep his confidence. But the laughter sounded a little forced even to his own ears. The young man continued, his fingers dancing lightly over the keys. The melody began to grow stronger, more expressive, as if he was telling a story without words. There was a delicate balance between softness and power, precision and emotion. The manager took a step back, his earlier amusement replaced by a growing curiosity. This wasn't what he had expected at all. Other staff members started to notice too. The barista paused mid-pour, glancing toward the piano. A few servers stopped walking past, watching quietly. There was a ripple effect, One person's attention led to another's, and soon the whole cafe seemed to be drawn into the performance. Even the regulars, people who had been coming to the cafe for years, felt a shift in the atmosphere. The music was pulling everyone in, demanding their attention without a single word spoken. The young man's eyes were focused, but not on the audience. He seemed completely absorbed in the music, in the story he was creating with every note. His breathing was steady, his movements fluid. He wasn't playing for applause, recognition, or validation. He was playing because it was a part of him, because the music needed to be heard. The manager's initial smirk faded completely. He tried to hide it behind a cough, but he couldn't deny the truth. This wasn't an amateur. This wasn't someone who was merely dabbling with the piano. This was someone with real skill, someone who had spent countless hours practicing and perfecting their craft. The realization was humbling, though the manager tried not to show it. For a moment, the cafe was completely silent except for the music. The usual background noise, the clinking cups, chatter, footsteps, faded into the background. Every note seemed to fill the space, creating a bubble around the young man and the piano. People leaned in slightly, as if trying to capture every sound, every nuance. And then, without warning, the melody began to change. The soft, gentle tune shifted into something with more energy, more complexity. The manager's eyes widened slightly, realizing that the challenge he had made so casually might not end the way he expected. There was a spark in the music, a sudden intensity that demanded attention. Fingers moved faster, yet with precision. The young man's skill was becoming more and more apparent with each passing moment. People in the cafe couldn't help but react. Some whispered in astonishment. Some simply stared, unable to speak. Even the regulars who thought they had seen every type of performer in this cafe were taken aback. The music wasn't just good. It was captivating, powerful, and mesmerizing. It was the kind of performance that made time seem to slow down. The manager cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. He reminded himself that it was still a joke, still a playful challenge. But deep down, he knew he had underestimated the young man completely. The quiet confidence, the flawless technique, the emotional depth, it was all too much to ignore. He realized that whatever happened next, he had a front row seat to something extraordinary. As the young man continued to play, the manager looked around at the audience. Everyone was focused entirely on the piano, entirely on the music. Phones were out, cameras ready, but even that couldn't capture the full essence of the performance. The young man seemed to be in his own world, yet at the same time he had a hold over everyone in the cafe. It was a strange, powerful feeling, as if the music itself had cast a spell. By the time the part of the melody ended, a quiet hush fell over the cafe. People were breathing a little more slowly, almost afraid to break the silence. The young man lifted his hands slightly, preparing for the next sequence of notes. There was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that what was coming next would be even more remarkable. The manager, now fully aware of his misjudgment, shifted uncomfortably. He had laughed at the idea of kneeling, thinking it would never happen. But looking at the young man and the intensity of the performance, he began to wonder if he would actually have to honor his words. He swallowed nervously, realizing that this was no ordinary piano player. He was facing someone who had the skill, the passion, and the mastery to turn a simple cafe performance into something unforgettable. And in that quiet moment, as the young man's fingers rested lightly on the keys, everyone in the cafe understood that they were witnessing the start of something extraordinary. It wasn't just a challenge or a joke anymore. It was the beginning of a performance that no one would ever forget. The kind of moment that stayed in your mind long after the last note faded away. The young man's fingers moved over the piano keys with a grace that seemed effortless, yet every note held a quiet intensity that drew the entire cafe into a different world. The simple, gentle tune from before had transformed into something more intricate. The manager, who had been standing confidently just moments ago, now felt an unfamiliar tension in his chest. He realized that the young man was not just playing music, he was telling a story through it, a story that demanded attention and respect. People in the cafe watched in awe, Conversations had completely stopped. Some leaned forward in their chairs. Others stood near the piano, captivated. Even the regulars, who had seen dozens of performers over the years, whispered to each other in disbelief. The way the young man moved from soft, delicate notes to powerful, commanding chords made the music feel alive, almost as if the piano itself was speaking. The manager couldn't help but step closer. He wanted to see more, to understand how someone so calm and quiet could hold such power in their hands. The young man didn't look at him directly, didn't react to the audience's reactions. His eyes were focused on the keys, his expression serene. It was clear that he played for himself first, and for the music, not for attention or praise. As the melody shifted, it introduced subtle, complicated patterns. The manager noticed the precision in each movement. Every chord was perfectly placed. Every note held just the right duration. He tried to mask his astonishment, but he couldn't hide the growing admiration in his eyes. He had been confident and playful, thinking this would be a small joke. But the young man had completely taken control of the room without a single word. The music continued to evolve, gradually building intensity. The young man's hands moved faster, but never chaotic. Each note was deliberate, each pause measured. It wasn't just skill. It was a deep understanding of the music, a connection that went beyond technical mastery. The manager felt a mix of awe and humility. He had underestimated this quiet figure completely, and now he was forced to acknowledge his mistake internally. People around the cafe began to react more openly. Some gasped softly, others whispered their amazement. A few pulled out their phones to record, not wanting to forget a single moment. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had started as a casual morning in a cafe had become a private concert, with everyone as the audience. Even the baristas, who were used to background noise and music, paused in their tasks to watch and listen. The young man introduced subtle variations in the melody, weaving complexity into something that had first seemed simple. The manager leaned closer, his earlier arrogance replaced by curiosity and a hint of nervousness. He had never seen anyone play with such control and emotion at the same time. The music didn't just entertain, it moved people. He watched as eyes glistened, hands clutched cups of coffee a little tighter, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. There was a delicate balance in the performance, a mix of technical brilliance and emotional depth. The young man could have chosen to show off, to play fast and loud and impress everyone. But instead, he chose a path that invited the audience in. It was subtle, quiet, and powerful all at once. The manager realized that this was a true artist, someone who understood not only how to play but how to communicate through music. The intensity of the performance began to grow. Fast passages alternated with gentle, flowing melodies. The young man's fingers flew over the keys, but never too fast to lose clarity. Each transition felt natural, almost conversational. The manager's mind raced, wondering how someone could have practiced so long and so well without drawing attention to themselves before. The quiet confidence and humility of the young man made the performance even more impressive. Customers in the cafe were completely absorbed. A few had tears in their eyes. Some smiled faintly, lost in thought. There was a sense that the music was speaking to something deep inside each listener, stirring emotions they hadn't expected to feel that morning. Even the manager, who had come to tease and laugh, felt a lump in his throat as he watched and listened. He had been ready to make a joke, but instead, he was witnessing a master at work. The young man's focus never wavered. He didn't glance at the manager or the audience, didn't pause for recognition or applause. The music was enough. Each note carried intention, each chord progression seemed perfectly planned, yet completely natural. It was the kind of playing that made the listener forget the surroundings, the chatter, the coffee cups. Everything except the piano and the story it told. As the melody reached a particularly intense section, the manager instinctively took a step back. He felt small in comparison, almost embarrassed for having doubted the young man. He had expected a simple tune, maybe a few flubbed notes, and instead, he was watching someone transform the entire cafe with nothing but skill, focus, and heart. It was humbling, even intimidating. The young man didn't rush. Even as the music became more complicated, each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. It was a performance that required not just talent, but patience, control, and deep understanding. The manager watched, fascinated, realizing that this was not just a morning performance. It was a demonstration of years of dedication, countless hours of practice, and a genuine love for music. Some customers whispered to each other, trying to describe what they were witnessing. Words seemed inadequate. The performance was more than just notes. It was a feeling, an experience. The young man's hands moved effortlessly, yet there was emotion in every gesture, a sense that he was communicating something beyond the music itself. People felt connected, even if they didn't know why. The manager shifted again, feeling a mix of admiration and disbelief. He had been confident, playful, and even a little mocking, but he had been completely wrong. The young man was not just good, he was extraordinary. There was a depth and sophistication to his playing that couldn't be learned quickly or faked. It was the kind of talent that commanded respect without the need for words or recognition. As the music began to soften, returning to a gentle flow, the manager noticed how the young man controlled the room effortlessly. He had guided the audience through excitement, tension, and now a calm resolution. Everyone was completely absorbed, and there was a collective sense of awe. The young man lifted his hands slightly, preparing for the next section, and the room waited, breathless. It was clear that this was only the beginning. The manager, the customers, and the staff knew they were witnessing something remarkable. The young man's calm demeanor and quiet confidence masked a level of skill and artistry that none of them had anticipated. The performance wasn't about proving himself or showing off. It was about sharing music in its purest form. As the café remained still, listening, the young man's next notes promised even greater intensity and emotion. The manager clenched his fists lightly, knowing that whatever came next would surpass even this incredible beginning. The atmosphere was electric, filled with anticipation, and everyone understood that they were part of a moment that would be remembered for a long time. The young man's music had taken control, and no one in the café could look away. The young man's fingers glided across the keys with increasing confidence, each note ringing clearly, effortlessly. The soft, flowing melody of the previous section had grown into something much more complex, and it was impossible for anyone in the café not to be drawn into it. The manager, who had initially laughed at his own joke, now stood frozen, captivated and slightly embarrassed by how wrong he had been. He had underestimated the quiet figure at the piano, assuming it would be a casual, easy performance. Instead, he was witnessing mastery that demanded attention. The audience could feel the energy shift in the café. Conversations had completely stopped. The clinking of spoons against coffee cups, the background chatter, even the sound of the espresso machine, faded into the background. Everyone's focus was on the young man at the piano. The music flowed like a story, with peaks of excitement and valleys of calm, drawing listeners in with every chord. There was a rhythm to the performance that was both natural and powerful, giving the impression that the pianist and the piano were one. As the melody became more intense, the young man added subtle flourishes and improvisations that caught everyone by surprise. Notes that had seemed simple a moment ago now revealed intricate patterns, showing both creativity and technical skill. The manager's eyes widened slightly as he watched the hands move. Each finger seemed to have its own purpose, each chord perfectly placed. He could feel the confidence and years of practice behind every movement, and it humbled him. Customers leaned forward in their seats, some sitting upright with wide eyes, others resting their hands on the table, mesmerized. A few people quietly whispered to their neighbors, expressing amazement and disbelief. Phones were raised, cameras capturing the moment, though everyone knew that no recording could ever truly capture the feeling in the room. The young man wasn't performing for recognition. He was performing because the music lived inside him, and it needed to be shared. The manager could no longer maintain his teasing demeanor. He had intended to mock the young man with his earlier challenge, but now he was silent, caught in awe. The confidence he had shown moments ago had faded into respect, tinged with a hint of nervousness. He began to understand that this wasn't just a casual pianist. This was someone who had dedicated their life to their craft. Someone who could transform a simple cafe into a concert hall with nothing but skill and passion. The young man's hands moved faster, yet every note remained clear, deliberate, and intentional. The music was a perfect balance of speed, precision, and emotion. There was a sense of storytelling, a journey that carried the audience through rising tension and sudden quiet moments, leaving them hanging on each sound. It was impossible to look away or lose focus. The manager felt a strange mix of awe, excitement, and a small pang of guilt for having underestimated the pianist. The melody grew richer and more layered, with harmonies weaving together seamlessly. The young man's expression remained calm, but the intensity in his playing spoke volumes. The audience could feel the emotion pouring from him without a single word. Every person in the cafe was caught in the magic of the moment, completely absorbed in the music. The young man had turned a normal morning into an unforgettable experience. Even the staff couldn't help but pause in their tasks. The barista had stopped pouring a cup of coffee. The servers were still mid-step, and even the regular customers who had been chatting quietly now leaned forward in fascination. It wasn't just skill that commanded their attention. It was the emotional depth, the way the music seemed to speak directly to the heart. It was a reminder that talent could surprise anyone, and humility could be as powerful as confidence. The manager felt his pulse quicken. The joke he had made earlier now seemed almost foolish. He realized he might actually have to kneel, not just for humor but in genuine respect. The young man's music had silenced every laugh, every casual comment, every expectation of mediocrity. What was meant to be playful had become something profound. The manager's thoughts raced as he tried to anticipate what would come next, though he quickly realized that predicting the young man's next note was impossible. The young man shifted effortlessly between complex passages and soft, lingering notes. The music was unpredictable yet perfectly controlled. The audience was spellbound, some with tears quietly forming, others simply wide-eyed in wonder. The young man wasn't seeking validation, but it seemed impossible for anyone to resist being moved by the sheer emotion in each key pressed. Every person in the cafe felt a connection to the music, though they couldn't explain why. It was as if the piano itself had begun to speak to each listener individually. The intensity of the performance continued to rise. The young man played faster, yet each note retained its clarity and precision. The manager could hardly breathe. He had never expected someone so young, so unassuming, to command such authority over an instrument and over the room. It was humbling to witness such talent, and a quiet realization dawned upon him. This was more than a performance. It was a lesson in respect, patience, and the power of quiet confidence. People began to sense a shift in the atmosphere. The cafe was no longer a casual place for coffee and conversation. It had become a sanctuary for music, a temporary escape from the world outside. Every note seemed to ripple through the room, leaving a lasting impression. Customers who had initially been skeptical or indifferent were now completely immersed. The young man's skill had transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary, proving that true talent often hides in unexpected places. The young man's hands danced across the keys, alternating between gentle, flowing melodies and rapid, intricate passages. The manager watched closely, trying to understand the sheer skill and timing required. Each movement seemed effortless, yet the complexity of the music was undeniable. It was clear that this was the result of countless hours of dedication, practice, and love for the craft. The manager felt both humbled and inspired, realizing that talent, when paired with humility and passion, could leave an unforgettable mark on anyone who witnessed it. As the performance reached its peak, the young man introduced a new layer of emotion. The notes became softer, slower, almost as if he were guiding the audience through a story that words could never capture. The manager felt a deep sense of admiration and respect. He had laughed at the idea of kneeling earlier, but now it seemed inevitable, not as a joke, but as a sincere acknowledgement of mastery and artistry. The audience leaned forward collectively, holding their breath with every note. The young man's control over the piano was absolute, and yet it never felt forced. The music flowed naturally, carrying emotion, intensity, and beauty simultaneously. The manager realized that this was the kind of performance that could change someone's perspective, teach a lesson without words, and leave a lasting impression on everyone present. By the time the young man ended the section, there was a brief pause in the cafe. The silence was not awkward. It was full of anticipation and awe. The audience, including the manager, absorbed what they had just witnessed. The music had transported them, transformed them, even if only for a few moments. It had reminded them of the power of talent, passion, and quiet confidence. The manager took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He looked around at the audience, all captivated, all sharing the same sense of amazement. He realized that he had underestimated the young man entirely. What had started as a casual challenge had become a profound, unforgettable experience. The young man's skill, dedication, and humility had completely silenced the laughter, replaced it with respect, and left everyone in awe. The young man's hands rested lightly on the keys, preparing for the next passage. The audience leaned in, eager for what would come next. The manager, though still processing what he had just seen, knew one thing for certain. This young man was no ordinary pianist. He was a maestro in the making, and everyone in the cafe was privileged to witness the unfolding of his talent. The anticipation in the room was palpable, and there was no doubt that the next notes would be just as mesmerizing, perhaps even more extraordinary. The young man's performance reached a new level of intensity. His hands moved over the piano keys with incredible speed, yet every note remained clear and precise. The cafe, which had once been full of casual chatter and background noise, now felt like a concert hall. Customers leaned closer, their eyes fixed on the pianist, captivated by the combination of skill and emotion in every note. Even the manager, who had come with a playful challenge in mind, found himself completely absorbed, his confidence replaced by awe. The music seemed to fill every corner of the cafe. The manager could feel the vibration of the chords in his chest, each note resonating deep within him. The young man's fingers danced across the keys, moving effortlessly between intricate melodies and powerful chords. There was a fluidity to his playing that made the performance seem almost alive. It was not just the technical skill that impressed the audience, but the way the young man infused the music with emotion, telling a story without words. People in the cafe were spellbound. Some had tears quietly forming in their eyes, moved by the beauty of the music. Others smiled faintly, lost in thought, as if the melody had awakened memories or feelings they hadn't expected to encounter. Even the staff, who were used to performers coming and going, paused to watch. The barista, mid-pour, had stopped the flow of coffee, and the servers had halted their steps, drawn into the performance. The atmosphere was completely transformed. What had begun as a regular morning had become a remarkable event. The manager shifted uneasily. He had initially thought he could tease the young man, maybe even get a laugh from the audience. Now he realized he had been completely wrong. The performance was commanding the room, and he could feel his own pride and arrogance shrinking in the face of such talent. He stepped closer to the piano, unable to look away, yet also hesitant, almost afraid to interrupt the flow of the music. The young man's expression remained calm, serene even, as he continued to play. He didn't glance at the manager or the audience. His focus was entirely on the piano, on the story he was telling through each note. The audience felt this dedication. They were drawn into the performance not only by the sound but by the energy and intent behind it. Every chord, every pause, every delicate transition carried meaning. It was as if the young man was communicating directly with each listener, inviting them to experience the music with him. The melody became increasingly complex. The young man moved seamlessly between fast, intricate passages and slower, more reflective sections. The transitions were smooth, yet each change brought a new wave of emotion to the room. The audience couldn't look away. Their attention was completely captured. The cafe had become a shared space of wonder and awe, a place where the music dictated the rhythm of their experience, rather than the normal flow of conversation or activity. The manager's heart raced as he watched. He had underestimated this young man in every way. The initial amusement he felt at making a challenge now felt almost foolish. He had expected hesitation, mistakes, or at least some sign that the pianist was an amateur. Instead, he was witnessing a master at work, someone who had honed his craft to perfection and was now sharing it with complete confidence and humility. The young man's skill was undeniable, and the manager couldn't help but feel a mixture of respect and awe. The music reached a crescendo, filling the café with powerful, resonant chords. The young man's hands moved faster, but the clarity and control never faltered. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional. The audience felt the intensity, and their reactions reflected it. Gasps of admiration escaped quietly from some, while others simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process the beauty unfolding before them. The young man had captured the attention of everyone, transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. The performance was not just about speed or technical skill. The young man infused the music with emotion, weaving stories and feelings into every phrase. The manager watched as the audience reacted, realizing that this was the kind of performance that left a lasting impression. It wasn't just entertainment. It was an experience, one that connected with people on a deeper level. The young man's calm demeanor contrasted with the power of his playing, making the performance even more captivating. As the music continued, the young man began to explore softer, more delicate passages. The contrast between the powerful crescendos and gentle melodies created a dynamic that held the audience completely engaged. The manager felt the energy of the room shift with each note, the emotions of the listeners ebbing and flowing with the music. It was as if the young man controlled not only the piano but the atmosphere itself, guiding the audience through a journey of sound and feeling. Customers who had initially been skeptical or indifferent were now completely absorbed. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotional depth of the performance. Others whispered quietly to their neighbors, sharing their amazement. Even the regulars, who had seen many performers over the years, acknowledged that this was something extraordinary. The young man's ability to balance technical mastery with emotional expression had transformed the café into a place of shared wonder. The manager, standing near the piano, felt a sense of humility he hadn't expected. He had laughed at the idea of kneeling earlier, thinking it would never happen. Now, he understood that the young man's skill demanded respect. The performance was more than just notes on a page. It was a display of dedication, passion, and artistry that left a lasting impact on everyone present. He realized that talent often comes quietly, in unexpected forms, and that it can surprise even the most confident observers. The young man's hands moved with fluid precision, transitioning seamlessly between complex passages and soft, reflective melodies. Each note seemed to carry meaning, telling a story that words could not capture. The audience was completely captivated, their attention held by the music alone. The café had become a space where time seemed to slow, where the outside world faded away, and the only reality was the piano and the young man playing it. The manager's initial amusement had completely disappeared, replaced by admiration and a growing sense of awe. He watched as the young man guided the audience through the performance, each movement intentional, each chord perfectly placed. The young man's humility and focus made the performance even more impressive. He was not seeking recognition or applause. He was simply sharing his music, and in doing so, he had captivated everyone in the café. As the music reached another peak, the young man played with even greater intensity, his fingers moving rapidly but precisely over the keys. The audience felt the energy, their emotions rising with the powerful chords and intricate melodies. The manager stood silently, humbled and inspired by what he was witnessing. He had underestimated the young man entirely, and now he understood the true meaning of talent, dedication, and quiet confidence. The young man began to bring the performance to a gentle close, transitioning from the powerful crescendos to soft, lingering notes. The audience leaned in, absorbing every sound, every nuance. The café was completely silent, the usual background noise absent. People were lost in the music, experiencing something rare and unforgettable. The manager felt a deep respect for the young man, realizing that he had just witnessed something extraordinary. As the last notes faded, there was a brief, reverent silence. The audience, including the manager, held their breath, reluctant to break the spell. The young man lifted his hands from the keys, his expression calm and serene, as if nothing remarkable had happened. Yet, everyone in the cafe knew that they had witnessed a performance that would stay with them for a long time. The young man had taken an ordinary morning and turned it into a moment of awe and inspiration, leaving an unforgettable mark on everyone present. The cafe remained silent after the last note faded, leaving the audience in a state of awe. Everyone had been captivated by the young man's performance, and for a moment, no one dared to speak. The usual sounds of clinking cups, footsteps, and soft chatter had vanished, replaced by a stillness that felt almost sacred. The manager, who had initially thought this would be a playful challenge, stood frozen, his pride humbled and his respect for the pianist growing with every passing second. The young man's hands rested lightly on the keys, his expression calm and serene. He had not rushed, nor had he sought applause. His only goal had been to play from the heart, to express what he felt through the music. The audience felt the sincerity in his performance, and it left a lasting impression. Some customers had tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty of the melodies. Others sat quietly, smiling softly, touched by the emotions the music had stirred within them. The manager slowly stepped forward, realizing that this young man had completely shattered any preconceived notions he had about talent, skill, and humility. He remembered the words he had said earlier, words that were meant to tease and provoke laughter. "If you play hard piano, I'll kneel right here." What had been a casual joke now weighed heavily on him. He had underestimated the pianist entirely, and now he knew that kneeling was the only genuine response he could offer. He looked around at the audience, noticing the expressions of admiration and awe on their faces. Even the cafe staff, who had seen countless performers come and go, were visibly impressed. Some whispered to each other, sharing their disbelief. The young man had transformed an ordinary morning into something unforgettable, a performance that touched everyone present. The manager felt a wave of humility wash over him, and he realized that this was a rare moment, one that would be remembered for a long time. Slowly, deliberately, the manager lowered himself to his knees in front of the piano. The action was sincere, an acknowledgement of the extraordinary skill, dedication, and passion that the young man had displayed. The audience watched in quiet amazement, understanding the significance of the gesture. It was not about power or authority. It was about respect, admiration, and recognition of true talent. The young man looked up briefly, a gentle smile appearing on his face. He did not boast or revel in the moment. He simply nodded, accepting the respect that had been offered. The energy in the cafe shifted once more. The audience, inspired by the humility of the manager and the brilliance of the pianist, began to clap softly, gradually growing louder as their appreciation poured forth. Some cheered quietly, while others maintained a respectful silence, still captivated by the emotions that lingered in the room. The young man had not only performed with skill and passion, but he had also inspired a sense of unity and admiration among everyone present. The manager, still on his knees, felt a mixture of emotions. He was humbled, inspired, and grateful for the opportunity to witness such talent. He realized that the young man's performance was more than just a display of musical ability. It was a lesson in humility, dedication, and the power of expressing oneself fully. He had laughed earlier, thinking this was a simple challenge, but now he understood that he had been given the privilege of witnessing a master at work. The young man resumed playing, this time with a gentle, flowing melody that contrasted with the intensity of the previous sections. The audience leaned in once more, captivated by the subtlety and beauty of the notes. The music carried emotion without needing words, and everyone felt the depth of expression in each chord. It was a reminder that talent, when combined with sincerity and humility, could move people in ways that nothing else could. Customers who had been skeptical at the beginning now found themselves completely absorbed. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others whispered softly to their neighbors, sharing their amazement. The atmosphere was electric, yet serene, filled with a sense of wonder and reverence. The young man had transformed a simple cafe into a space where art and emotion took center stage. The manager remained kneeling, listening intently, and reflecting on his own journey. He had learned a valuable lesson. Talent could appear unexpectedly, often in the most unassuming forms. He realized that true skill was not about showing off or seeking recognition. It was about dedication, passion, and the willingness to share one's abilities with others. The young man's performance had taught him this lesson in the most powerful way possible. The music began to slow, transitioning into a delicate finale. The young man's hands moved gracefully, each note carrying a sense of closure and completeness. The audience, captivated from the very beginning, felt the weight of the moment. They had witnessed something rare and beautiful, a performance that would remain in their memories long after they left the cafe. The manager, humbled and inspired, continued to kneel, recognizing the magnitude of what he had just experienced. As the last notes faded into silence, the cafe erupted into applause. The audience cheered, clapped, and some even stood, unable to contain their admiration. The young man lifted his hands from the piano, a serene smile on his face, acknowledging the appreciation without seeking it. The manager slowly rose to his feet, still humbled, and approached the young man once more. He offered a genuine handshake, a silent acknowledgement of the respect, admiration, and gratitude he felt. The young man nodded in response, accepting the gesture with quiet grace. The cafe staff and customers continued to express their admiration, some approaching to offer words of praise, others simply standing in awe. The performance had created a shared experience, a moment of connection and inspiration that transcended the ordinary. The manager realized that he had been a witness to something truly extraordinary, a reminder of the power of talent, humility, and the human spirit. As the cafe returned to its normal rhythm, the memory of the performance lingered. Customers chatted quietly, but there was a sense of excitement and wonder that had not been there before. The young man remained at the piano, playing softly, as if continuing to share his gift with the world. The manager, once confident and playful, now walked with a newfound humility and respect, inspired by what he had witnessed. The performance had been more than music. It had been a lesson, a reminder that true talent could inspire, humble, and transform everyone who experienced it. After the applause settled, the cafe slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere remained different. The magic of the performance lingered in the air. Customers who had been merely stopping for coffee were now talking in hushed, excited tones, sharing their experiences of the morning. They couldn't stop discussing the young man at the piano, the way he had played, the emotions he had stirred, and the power he had commanded without saying a single word. The memory of every note seemed to hang in the room, touching everyone present in its own unique way. The young man continued to play softly, gently easing into calmer, more reflective melodies. His fingers moved with grace, each note intentional and heartfelt. He did not play to impress, nor did he play for applause. He played because it was his way of communicating, sharing what he felt within him. The audience felt the sincerity in his music, and it left a lasting impression that went far beyond the technical skill he displayed. It was an experience that stayed with each person long after the sounds faded. The manager, still near the piano, took a deep breath and looked around the cafe. He noticed how different everyone seemed. People were quiet, thoughtful, and almost reverent, as if the young man had opened a small window to something extraordinary in the world. The manager reflected on his earlier arrogance, the casual joke he had made, and the laughter he had expected. He realized how wrong he had been and how much he had underestimated the quiet young man who had captured everyone's attention so completely. He approached the young man once more, this time with humility and respect. There were no words of challenge, no teasing smirk, only genuine admiration. He offered a sincere handshake, acknowledging not just the incredible performance, but the dedication, talent, and heart behind it. The young man accepted with a gentle nod, his calm expression showing that he understood the unspoken respect being offered. The audience watched silently, sensing the significance of the moment, understanding that this interaction was a true acknowledgement of mastery and humility. Customers began to gather closer, some leaving their seats to see the young man better, others whispering their amazement to each other. The young man's music continued to fill the café, gentle and flowing, yet full of life. He played with subtle dynamics, soft passages that invited reflection, and slow crescendos that reminded listeners of the power of a single note. The café had become a space where time seemed to slow, a place where the world outside no longer mattered, and where music alone could create a sense of connection and shared emotion. The manager took a moment to reflect on what he had learned that day. He realized that true talent often hides in unexpected places, and it is easy to underestimate someone based on appearances or assumptions. The young man had shown that skill, when paired with humility, could inspire, move, and even transform those who witnessed it. The manager understood that leadership, recognition, and influence were not about power or authority alone, but about the ability to recognize greatness when it appeared, and to respect it. The audience remained captivated, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling quietly, and a few simply standing in silent admiration. Everyone had been touched by the performance in different ways. Some felt a personal connection to the emotions expressed in the music. Others felt inspired, reminded that dedication and talent, when shared sincerely, could create something beautiful and unforgettable. The young man's music had reached far beyond the piano, creating an invisible thread that connected everyone in the café in a moment of shared humanity. The young man transitioned into a final passage, soft and delicate, allowing the music to settle like a gentle sigh. His hands moved with calm precision, each note fading gracefully into the next. The audience leaned in, absorbed by the subtle beauty and intricate skill of the finale. It was a quiet, powerful ending, leaving a sense of peace and satisfaction that balanced the intensity of the previous sections. Everyone knew that the performance had reached its conclusion, yet it left a lasting impression, a memory that would stay with them long after the café returned to its normal rhythm. As the final note lingered in the air, the café erupted into applause once more. This time, it was louder, more heartfelt, a collective expression of gratitude and admiration. Some customers stood, others clapped energetically, while a few simply smiled quietly, overwhelmed by the experience. The young man lifted his hands from the piano with a gentle smile, acknowledging the audience without seeking attention or praise. The applause continued, a shared recognition of the extraordinary talent and heart that had just been displayed. The manager, now standing fully, felt a deep sense of humility and respect. He had come to the café with a playful challenge and a confident attitude, but he left with a profound lesson. He realized that true mastery is not about showing off or dominating others. It is about dedication, patience, humility, and the ability to touch hearts through one's craft. The young man's performance had reminded him of this, and he felt inspired to carry that understanding forward in his own life. Customers began to talk quietly again, reflecting on what they had witnessed. Some expressed amazement at the skill, some at the emotion, and some at the way the young man had transformed the ordinary space into something magical. The café had become a place of shared experience and inspiration, a place where people felt connected through the power of music. It was clear that this was a performance no one would forget, a moment that would be remembered and recounted to others for a long time. The young man continued to play softly, not for recognition, but simply because it was his way of sharing his gift. The audience, even after the applause had ended, remained captivated, listening to every note and appreciating the artistry. The manager, standing nearby, watched in admiration, understanding that he had witnessed something extraordinary and rare. The young man's talent, humility, and dedication had created an experience that went beyond entertainment. It had created a moment of inspiration, reflection, and connection. As the café slowly returned to its usual pace, the manager approached the young man once more. He expressed his admiration verbally this time, thanking him for the performance and acknowledging the profound impact it had on everyone present. The young man smiled gently, accepting the words with calm gratitude. The audience continued to watch, sensing that this interaction was another important part of the shared experience. Another moment of recognition and respect that completed the story of the performance. The young man's music continued softly in the background, creating a gentle ambience as customers began to leave or settle back into their routines. Yet, the memory of the performance lingered. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing their impressions and feelings, inspired by the skill, humility, and emotional depth they had witnessed. The manager, reflecting on the entire experience, understood that he had learned something invaluable. True talent is rare, often unexpected, and deserves respect and recognition whenever it appears. By the time the cafe quieted down completely, the young man had finished his last piece. He lifted his hands from the keys, closed his eyes briefly, and exhaled, a small smile crossing his face. It was a quiet, contented moment, a reflection of the satisfaction that comes from sharing one's gift sincerely. The audience, now dispersed but still absorbed in the memory of what they had seen, knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The manager, deeply humbled, walked away with a renewed sense of respect, understanding, and inspiration. The young man gathered his belongings slowly, the cafe now returning to a sense of normalcy. Yet, the energy of the morning remained. People who had witnessed the performance carried it with them, sharing the story with friends, reflecting on the emotions they had felt, and feeling inspired by the talent and humility they had experienced. The cafe had become more than a place for coffee. It had become a place of inspiration, a place where art and human connection had come together in a memorable and profound way. The performance would be remembered, not just for the music, but for the lesson it had taught about talent, humility, and the power of sincere expression.